finding a neighborhood pharmacist is becoming increasingly challenging. Over the past 2 years, the nation's 3 biggest pharmacy chains with brick-and-mortar stores.
A new study finds about 1 in 3 pharmacies have closed in the United States since 2010. From mom-and-pop independents to big-chain drugstores, this trend has a serious impact on healthcare across the country.
As special correspondent Fred DeSam Lazaro reports, many small or independent pharmacies complain that those high prices, in many cases, actually hurt.
It starts in the smallest of ways, almost hidden in plain sight. A routine refill suddenly isn't available, or the price tag has climbed so high it feels out of reach. Behind that brief moment at the counter lies a much larger storm, one that began with trade disputes between Washington and New Delhi and has now spilled into medicine cabinets across America. What was once a debate over tariffs has turned into a battle for access to life-saving drugs, leaving families to wonder how long their supplies will last. If this spiral continues, what happens when the next prescription can't be filled? And who will pay the highest price? In August 2025, a single announcement from Washington set off a chain reaction no one was prepared for. The Trump administration announced a 50% tariff on Indian imports, calling it a bold move to rebuild American industry. Headlines focused on factories and jobs, but hidden in the fine print was something far more personal. Pharmaceuticals, the very drugs millions of Americans depend on, were swept into the trade fight. The consequences wouldn't be measured in trade figures or manufacturing output, but in empty pharmacy shelves and skyrocketing costs at the counter. India didn't respond with fire or fury. There were no boycotts or loud threats. Instead, its answer was quiet but calculated. Production slowed, exports were delayed, and routes were redirected to other regions. Nothing as dramatic as an outright ban, but in its subtlety lay its power. Each delayed shipment chipped away at the flow of medicine to the United States, creating a disruption that soon reached ordinary households. Few Americans realized how deep their country's dependency on India had become. More than 40% of the nation's generic drugs originate in Indian factories, an enormous share of the medications people take every day. These aren't rare or experimental treatments. They're the basics, the antibiotics given to children, the insulin diabetics inject, the pills that keep blood pressure under control, and the cancer drugs that buy patients time. For years, India produced these medicines at a fraction of U.S. manufacturing costs, often 60 to 70% cheaper, making it possible for healthcare in America to remain even somewhat affordable. But the moment that stream faltered, the system's weakness was laid bare. At first, it seemed like a series of minor inconveniences. A prescription refilled later than expected, a pharmacy unable to keep a common drug in stock for a few days, an order delayed. Yet those small ripples turned into waves almost overnight. Within weeks, cities across America were facing shortages that upended daily life. Ordinary families began rationing medicine. Parents split pills so a child's treatment could last longer. Some patients stopped taking their prescribed drugs altogether because prices had climbed out of reach. In Texas, one man walked into his local pharmacy to find that the cost of his heart medication had jumped from $28 to $91 in a single month. There was no explanation beyond a brief note saying supplies had been disrupted. He had no warning, no assistance, no alternative. He was left to choose between paying his rent or paying to stay alive. His story mirrored thousands of others. Diabetics scrambled to find insulin. Cancer patients faced delays in starting chemotherapy. Households once confident in the reliability of their prescriptions were suddenly thrown into uncertainty. This wasn't a hiccup in supply. It was the unraveling of a lifeline. When nearly half of America's generic drugs are compromised, it's not corporate executives or politicians who bear the burden. It's families at the kitchen table, weighing which bills can be postponed to afford medicine. It's parents praying their child's fever will break without antibiotics. It's seniors cutting pills in half to stretch one refill into 2. These people had no seat at the negotiating tables in Washington or New Delhi, yet they were the ones paying the price for decisions made in far-off capitals. As shelves emptied across the United States, India was busy reshaping its role abroad. Pharmaceutical exports were redirected toward Africa, Latin America, and Europe. For decades, the U.S. had benefited from India's position as the pharmacy of the world, encouraging its rise as a global supplier of affordable medicine. But now, that relationship was being rewritten. Instead of strengthening access for the United States, India was building new alliances with partners eager to fill the gap America had left behind. For Washington, it was a stunning reversal. What had once been a cornerstone of affordable healthcare had now become a dangerous vulnerability. Inside the White House, panic set in. Emergency meetings were called, bringing together the FDA, public health officials, and national security advisors. Ideas flew across the table, tapping into federal stockpiles, fast-tracking domestic production, importing through intermediaries. But the timelines were grim. Even the most optimistic estimates suggested it would take 6 months or more to stabilize supplies, and that was assuming India eased its restrictions. Nothing indicated it would. Meanwhile, India was drawing closer to its BRICS partners, Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa. What emerged was an informal alignment some analysts began calling the medicine belt. It wasn't framed as punishment for the United States, but rather as a strategic pivot toward nations eager for stronger trade ties. For the first time in decades, America found itself pushed to the back of the line for the world's most affordable and essential drugs. The irony was striking. For years, the United States had relied heavily on Indian factories to fill the gaps in its overpriced healthcare system. Generic drugs produced overseas were the only reason insurance companies could keep costs manageable, hospitals could balance budgets, and families could afford their prescriptions. That dependence had been convenient, until it became a liability. Now, as the flow of medicine was cut back, the United States was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Access to healthcare is not immune to politics. And when politics intervenes, lives hang in the balance. The pressure quickly rippled through the insurance sector. Providers, facing skyrocketing wholesale prices, passed those costs directly to consumers. Families without coverage were hit hardest, with life-saving prescriptions suddenly falling outside their plans altogether. The illusion of affordable care cracked wide open, exposing a system built on fragile international supply chains and political deals rather than domestic resilience. Perhaps the most dangerous shift was psychological. Generations of Americans had grown up believing their healthcare system was flawed but strong, costly, yet dependable. That belief is fading. A trade dispute thousands of miles away revealed just how fragile the entire structure truly is. Medicine has now proven to be as vulnerable to geopolitics as oil or steel, another bargaining chip in a world of shifting alliances. The figure of 40% might look like a mere line in a trade report, but in reality, it represents the foundation of American healthcare. Nearly half of the generic drugs that keep hospitals running, pharmacies stocked, and families alive depend on supply chains rooted in India. That dependency has always existed, but this crisis stripped away the illusion of stability. What the country is experiencing now is not a brief disruption. It is a full-scale stress test, and the system is failing in real time. Cracks are spreading across pharmacy counters, hospital wards, insurance offices, and into the homes of millions. Meanwhile, in another unprecedented turn of events, two of Asia's strongest powers, India and China, have simultaneously imposed a 100% tariff on iPhones, plunging the world's most valuable tech company into its deepest crisis in more than a decade. The scale of it feels almost surreal, yet it is unfolding in plain sight. India, once praised as Washington's reliable partner, has now aligned itself with China, America's fiercest rival. Together, they have struck a blow aimed squarely at Apple, a corporation with billions tied up in factories, supply chains, and millions of devices still waiting to reach consumers. The rupture can be traced back to late August 2025, when the Trump administration unveiled a sweeping 50% tariff on Indian imports, electronics included. For a nation long considered a partner, the move carried an unmistakable air of hostility, one many analysts described as unprecedented. The White House defended the measure as retaliation for India's continued energy trade with Russia, framing it as a matter of national security. But beyond the rhetoric, the consequences proved far more complicated. At the center of the storm sat Apple, and, by extension, the broader American tech industry. To grasp the scale of the fallout, it's essential to understand what India had become to Apple. Over the span of just a few years, the country transformed from a secondary production site into the company's primary manufacturing base. By mid-2025, more than 7 out of every 10 iPhones sold in the United States were being assembled not in China, but in India. Between March and May alone, factories in India shipped $3.2 billion worth of iPhones, the overwhelming majority bound directly for American consumers. It was a dramatic shift. In just 12 months, India's iPhone exports had climbed 76%, while China's output collapsed by nearly the same rate. This marked a complete realignment of Apple's global supply chain, a pivot driven not only by economics but by politics as well. According to industry reports, India was already producing 14% of all iPhones worldwide, with expectations of steady growth as Foxconn and other partners poured billions into new facilities. Government subsidies fueled the boom, cementing India's ambition to be recognized as a global technology powerhouse. Into this fragile balance came Washington's tariff order, landing with the force of a sledgehammer. What was intended as punishment for India's oil trade with Moscow instead struck directly at the heart of Apple's carefully engineered diversification strategy that in trying to protect national interests. The administration had destabilized one of the most critical supply chains in the American economy. Trade used as a weapon rarely strikes cleanly, and in this case, the collateral damage was both immediate and far-reaching. The shock wave spread quickly, and Apple now stands at the eye of the storm, its future tied to the trajectory of this escalating conflict. If iPhones assembled in India are forced to absorb the full 50% import tariff, prices will soar at a staggering pace. The finely tuned logistics that keep Apple's empire running risk breaking down, and pricing models built over years of predictable cycles could collapse. For a company that thrives on precision, from product releases to marketing campaigns, this isn't a minor disruption. It's an existential threat. That's all for today. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and before you leave, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you in the next one.